His name will be up in lights on Broadway. Kong, the eighth wonder of the world.
Hello and welcome back. For a moment we're going to go ahead and take Godzilla and put him to the side before we begin re-exploring him in my very next video. I think you know where I'm going today. Today on the spot we have Peter Jackson's King Kong, released in 2005, which remains one of my all-time favorite King Kong films. It's just a film that is a marvel to behold in my eyes, casting Naomi Watts, Jack Black, and Adrian Brody as our main cast. Alright, so let's just go ahead and say this. Bringing King Kong back to the big screen was not an easy task after so many years. Since King Kong lives, King Kong's name had largely been dormant, but that didn't mean the character had been forgotten at all. Even in the 90s, Toho attempted their plans to create a brand new Godzilla vs. King Kong, looking to recapture the magic from the 1962 King Kong vs. Godzilla film. The problem was, though, acquiring the rights of King Kong just wasn't easy at this point. The 90s were a time of resurgence and success for sci-fi films. However, despite all this, there just was never a successfully done King Kong film. The idea of a King Kong film just never got off the ground. 2005 would be the year that everything would come full circle, with Peter Jackson's name being attached to the project. And seriously, who better than Mr. Jackson, who is responsible for the critically acclaimed Lord of the Rings trilogy? Alright, so I feel like if anybody's gonna nail the wonder, the adventure, and the pure horror and terror that Skull Island possesses, it's gonna be Peter Jackson. Peter Jackson is just known for his 3-hour-long extravaganzas, and I was just curious at the time, how would this movie, and how would his ideas, all translate to a King Kong film? Could it be the same success? Or would it not be? A man since the age of 9, a young boy who became obsessed and emotional over the original King Kong film, often claiming that King Kong 1933 was his inspiration into venturing into a career of filmmaking. Truly a dream come true, to be the one that put King Kong back on the big screen for audiences. And this remake would prove to be very different than the 1976 film. Rather than setting this King Kong film in a modern era like the other film did in the 70s, this would switch things up and just go ahead and take things back to the beginning, 1933 to be exact. I was a major fan of this idea rather than setting it in the year 2005. I think my thing is oftentimes when I look at, older eras, there's something about the personality of the time. It's not just exactly the film itself, but we're talking about the design of everything, the buildings, the cars, the outfits, just how different things were in a different world at a different time before I was born. It just stands out even on the scenes when we're not in Skull Island. I want to get something out of the way before we go too deep into this. Okay, so I don't want to turn this into a King Kong 2005 versus a 76 film because these films, the variables, are very different. We're talking about two different eras of technology when it comes to filming movies, and the budget was a very different beast for King Kong 2005. This was very much the most expensive film at the time it was released. A whopping $207 million budget. It was pretty clear that Universal Pictures was willing to give Jackson whatever it took. Just make this film happen. On King Kong 76 end, we're only talking $27 million. Big difference financially. So I want to address something. If 3-hour films are not your thing, this isn't your film at all. Because I understand not everybody wants to sit through 3 hours of a movie. In fact, I do believe a little bit of this movie could be trimmed down just a tad, maybe by 20 to 30 minutes. But it's still a movie that I find myself getting through exactly when I go ahead and watch this film. The official runtime of this film was 188 minutes. But this doesn't even account for the special edition of this film, which is actually 201 minutes. Seriously, what do you expect from a Peter Jackson film? This is kind of his thing. Jam-packed with so much depth and length. To an extent. This has been one of the key points I've seen people say that is a drawback to this film actually, which I do understand. Not everybody has this much time to commit to a movie. Even when I was reviewing this movie, I had to think to myself, do I want to start it tonight? Because once I commit to a movie, I start it and I don't end. And for context, I reviewed from the special edition. The first hour of this film is simply just dialogue. The final 50 minutes of this is just returning back to New York with King Kong. So we're taking a 100-minute film from 1933 and filling in 200 more minutes basically. Hey, at least we didn't get one of those Hobbit type things, take the shortest book and stretch it out in 3 movies. And this is a little bit before, Twilight, Avengers, or Harry Potter had normalized making a part 1, part 2. At least we didn't have to wait for a part 2 King Kong Peter Jackson film. The film opens up with foreshadowing, set in 1933, a Great Depression era of the United States following Ann Darrow, who is hired by a con artist filmmaker by the name of Carl Denham. But before this hiring, Anne's career is kind of in question. We're looking at the possibility of taking a job doing burlesque. Freeze frame! Alright, this right here is very much a butterfly effect moment. Let's imagine that Anne had never stepped away. She had decided to do burlesque. Carl Denham had never approached her. This would have told an incredibly different story in her life. In fact, the following of everything that would have proceeded to happen would have been somebody else's problem. Who knows if they would have been smart enough to survive, or even to get King Kong to look at them differently. Chances are even, King Kong would have never been pulled from his island. But everything changes the moment she steps foot in the ship, setting forth to meet the terrors of Skull Island. She's under the impression that this film is going to be done in Singapore. One thing I always think about when I watch this film is I don't know how Carl intended to break it to everybody that they were going to go shoot the film in this forbidden location eventually. I mean, once they were on the boat, there really was no getting off. From the beginning, he's intentionally always looking for the island. But even before the crew stumbles upon it, it becomes apparent that Singapore is not the goal and never was.
We're going to find Skull Island. Find it, film it, and show it to the world.
Finally, our crew lands, stepping forth on the island, making the biggest mistake of all, along with giving a creepy child candy, or attempting. Hey, at least Carl isn't giving the natives smokes. But this only leads to the execution of various crew members by the natives, and let's just say, this is probably the least concerning method of death, after all. It's this, or being consumed alive headfirst by an insect. As per King Kong usual tradition, Anne is kidnapped and offered as a sacrifice as we meet King Kong, who's depicted as a giant silverback, rather than a bipedal ape as usual. So it's official, the search is on, so start taking a head count of all the characters, because bodies are about ready to fall. I'm not going to detail every single thing that they run into, but we're going to talk about how much I applaud all the life and everything there is on this island. As a viewer, you are on your toes, danger is constantly around the corner. And this is actually one of the reasons I hold this film in higher regard than Skull Island, because I never felt a sense of danger in that film. And don't take that as shortchanging that film, because I do love Skull Island as well. But in that film, the natives were portrayed as more peaceful to our survivors. Here, it just feels a lot more authentic, reminding you of how Skull Island is no place for mankind. Every step of the way, you really feel like you're getting a good look at the island. It's so beautiful, but yet terrifying at the same time. All of the aspects. The Brontosaurus chase scene, an absolute favorite of mine. Our characters have no choice but to run down a narrow valley trying to survive these damn Venatorauruses, who are just so intent on snagging a human for lunch. That kick was personal. He didn't have to kick a dinosaur in the head, but he does it anyway. Ultimately, I feel terrible for these Brontosauruses getting stuck in this claustrophobic mess, where likely they all died as our characters walked away. And of course, we gotta talk about the iconic King Kong vs. V-Rex scene. This is what we wanted right here. We want dinosaurs. King Kong films, that's just one of the things about them. Dinosaurs and King Kong just go hand in hand. And he just kills them in Mortal Kombat fashion. It's at this point where I knew this film truly delivered. Now, while in this film, the relationship between Anne and the crew members really is non-existent. I mean, really, you only see her getting attached to Jack right away. What this film makes up for is her chemistry with King Kong. It feels natural. From terror to warming up to King Kong, and Anne realizes there's more going on here. A lonely, last of his kind king, who's developed an emotional attachment to her. However, the conflict is, and the trial is to get Anne back, because Kong won't allow her rescue, even when they're trying to do the right thing. Eventually it leads up to everybody being set down a pit, which sets up for the most cursed scene in this film, the dreaded bug pit scene. Yes, it is dreadful, but the emotion, the anger, fear mixed with survival, it hits different. Watching Carl slip into madness once he realized the film has been damaged. At this point, with all the lives lost, he'll do anything to make sure that nobody dies in vain. He's already done enough shady business, but he's not beyond the point of taking King Kong from this island and taking him back to New York City. It's just a helpless fight down here. Everybody that survived the fall would have been better off hitting the ground and dying. The ones that survived begin to mourn those who have fallen. However, this doesn't matter to the predatory behavior of the insects. And I should also point out that the music is amazingly ambient here.
Kill it!
The world that everybody knows is so far away. Rescuing Anne, though, leads to the eventual capture of King Kong, bringing him back to New York City. Here, I'll admit, this does slow the movie down a little bit, especially from maybe about, I want to say a good 30 minutes possibly. But it's basically done to set up the final act of this film. If anything positive that comes from it, it's the fact that it kind of gives the viewers a moment to kind of prepare for what's going to happen. You know the inevitable is going to happen. King Kong escapes swinging around every blonde lady, searching for Anne. Bad day to be a blonde lady in New York City going for a stroll. The look he gives this woman always makes me chuckle. But jokes and laughs aside, this is where this film makes my heart heavy. You know what's gonna happen. You really do. I've heard some people say that the ice skating sequence is unnecessary, but really I object to this. The reason why is because this is the last time we're gonna see King Kong actually happy. After all the loneliness, the battles, being took from his home and embarrassed on stage, he's finally found what he cares about. This is the last stand for King Kong on the Empire State Building. There's nothing he can do. He's as helpless as the humans were in the bug pit. Only this time, no one's coming to rescue him. The film wraps up closing out my favorite King Kong remake of all time. It's a film that's a pure roller coaster anytime I have a chance to watch it. I think the one thing that makes this film extra enjoyable for me is the fact that it had an amazing video game tie-in that came out back in 2005. If you grew up in the 2000s or the 90s, you will remember that video game tie-ins of movies were just a big thing, even if they were absolutely terrible. Fortunately, the King Kong tie-in was not terrible. In fact, I enjoyed it so much. It was a game where you had to consider the utilization of your ammo and snap dinosaurs in half to your heart's delight. It was just so much fun retracing every place that you saw in the movie after you watched it on the big screen. And while King Kong was a box office success and jumped in as one of the top 10 highest grossing movies of 2005, unfortunately I do believe more was expected of this film. 2005 was just a massive year for Hollywood. The Harry Potter series was storming the scene. War of the Worlds would get its own remake. Star Wars, it was wrapping up the prequel series with Revenge of the Sith, which is obviously my favorite prequel series, or just universally considered to be one of the best of the prequel series. Let's put this in perspective. This movie had a $207 million budget, and I'm pretty sure more was hoped for than a $562 million return. And I can only think of a few reasons of why this film possibly didn't crack the top 3 highest grossing films of 2005. Maybe there's a possibility people weren't in any hurry to see a 3-hour movie multiple times, but that never stopped people from showing up to see The Lord of the Rings multiple times. Granted, I will say, Lord of the Rings has a solid apparent fan base that will turn up. And plus, the Lord of the Rings series was just a big deal in the 2000s due to the fact that it was the first time that these classic books were being adapted into major Hollywood movies. Same with the Harry Potter series. King Kong, it had been an existing series for a long time that had been dormant for about 20 years, and pretty well everybody knows what's going to happen. There's also the chance this movie may have lacked the incentive that Skull Island had. When Skull Island released, we knew there was going to be a crossover between Godzilla and King Kong. It had been announced ahead of time. This film had been established that it was just going to be a King Kong film. Whatever the case is, this movie was a solid W for King Kong fans, kaiju fans all alike. It's worth a watch, but I warn you, if you need instant action popping off in the first 20 to 40 minutes, this movie won't be your film. This concludes my take on Peter Jackson's King Kong, as I see it. Next up, it's the Monsterverse, Godzilla 2014. Can Legendary get it right and kick things off the right way? Let's talk about that next time. Like, subscribe, sound off in the comment section, I'll catch you around. Thanks for joining me.